try that one more time. Good afternoon. Excellent. Thank you so much. Welcome to Planet Word, the only museum in the country, I repeat, the only museum in the country dedicated to renewing and inspiring a love of words, language, and reading, something I think that is now more important than ever. Don't you agree? Yeah. My name is Britt Oates. I'm the manager of public programs, and on behalf of myself and the entire Planet Word team, we are so excited to welcome you to today's programming event. This is 500 and counting, a Freedom Reads celebration. Now, today's program will include a talk/reading by CEO and founder of Freedom Reads, Reginald Dwayne Betts, followed by a brief Q&A. And now I will go ahead and introduce our esteemed guest. Reginald Dwayne Betts, poet, lawyer, 2021 MacArthur Fellow, and founder and CEO of Freedom Reads, a not-for-profit organization that is radically transforming the access to literature in prisons through the installation of freedom libraries in prisons across the country. For more than 20 years, he has used his poetry and essays to explore the world of prison and the effects of violence and incarceration on American society. In 2019, Betts won the National Magazine Award in the Essays and Criticism category for his New York Times Magazine essay that chronicles his journey from prison to becoming a licensed attorney. He has been awarded a Radcliffe Fellowship from Harvard's Radcliffe Institute of Advanced Study, a Guggenheim Fellowship, an Emerson Fellow at New America, and most recently, a Civil Society Fellow at Aspen. Betts holds a JD from Yale Law School. Now please join me in giving a nice warm welcome to the amazing Reginald Dwayne Betts.
Thank you all for coming. Before I start, my team told me I had to inform y'all of several really important things. First, after I read, I'm assuming it's going to be good. I'm assuming you want to buy books. You could buy them upstairs. And you get a free gift, broadside, handmade paper, beautiful poems. So if some poems here, you get that. And this is a special day because this is the debut, the world debut of the Freedom Reads hoodie. And I also get to do this though, see, I get to give my mom one in front of y'all to see how that's endearing. You see the book cover? You might notice. Candace Moyer, that's a perfect segue. My girlfriend designed the book cover, and I decided to turn it into a coat because I wanted to be really cool. And also, this is the Freedom Edition. Now, one of the things that happen in prison and one of the impetuses for Freedom Reads is that if you are incarcerated, you can't get hardback books. And I remember when my book Felon came out, friends of mine say, oh, Shahid sent us a book. Everybody in prison calls me Shahid. So when the name Shahid comes up during his reading or when you read the book, it is me being self-referential. I said I can't because it's hardback. And I worked with my publisher and I convinced my publisher to do a Freedom Edition that we could give away to people in prison. And Doggerel is the most joyous book that I've ever written. It's the first book, if you've seen my other books, I once published a book that had no artwork on the cover. It was just black and bleak, And it was called Bastards of the Reagan Era. It's a good book, but it's kind of sad. And then I published a book called Felon that was filled with black faces that were redacted by black tar. Again, it's a good book, but the vibe of it. And I realized as I was going through the toughest time of my life that we actually get a choice to perseverate on our grievances or to lean towards joy. And I wanted to make sure this book in particular got into prisons because I have found a way in this life to lean towards joy. And most of that has been by recognizing that I have always been fortunate. You don't go to prison at 16 years old and 100-odd pounds and survive if you are not incredibly lucky, incredibly grateful to people around you who kept you safe. And, my aunts are here, my mom is here, they came to see me on a regular basis. So even in prison, I was blessed. And this book tries to capture some of that. I opened the Freedom Edition with a letter, which usually you don't get a chance to read because fortunately none of us are in prison. But if you got this in prison, I wanted you to know why you have it in your hands. I wanted you to know what it was created for and who it was created by. So I'll read you an excerpt of that, and then I'll start reading poems. And this is really fun. This is the 20th anniversary of my release from prison, which is also a kind of joyous thing for me. Dear reader, when I left prison 20 years ago, come March 4th, 2025, I planned on leaving it all behind. The cells, my memories of running mile after mile on a gravel track, that one alley-oop I tossed to Rod as he walked the ladder of air to the freedom of a slam dunk. All of you can imagine going inside as a barely breaking 100 pounds teenager. Or maybe you can't. But imagine what it means to me. A lonely kid getting scraps of wisdom from men who would chop it up with me about everything. From the philosophy of Frantz Fanon to why Randall Cunningham turning a football field into a choreographed scene from Alvin Ailey was the most beautiful thing they witnessed. And I came home imagining that I would leave it all behind. What kind of fool am I? I know the names of the men I did time with: Fats, Juvie, Luke, Starr, Jermaine, Divine, and too many more to list here. I have gone to 6900 Atmore Drive in Richmond, Virginia, to argue before the parole board for their freedom. Over the years, I've sent few pictures. I got lost in the years it took to finish community college, Prince George's Community College, to graduate from the University of Maryland, and finally to become a lawyer with a degree from Yale Law School. But what of it? In 2020, I founded Freedom Reads, an organization that builds freedom libraries and opens them up on prison cell blocks, so that when you roll up out of your bed, when you walk out of your cell door, you had a beauty of books right there. This is why being at Planet Word is so significant for me. People in prison are starved of the opportunity to read contemporary literature. They are starved of the opportunity to access the library, because often, even if there is a library, it is inaccessible to them. But we put it right on their cell blocks, and we have done that. From zero, from an idea in my head, on a sleepy morning when I was standing in student housing, wondering what I might do to be able to save myself, take care of my children, pay my bills, to an organization that employs nearly 20 people, several of whom have done time in prison, to an organization that has built 500 freedom libraries in roughly 50 prisons in 13 states in this country, to an organization that routinely works in some of the darkest places in this country, collaborating with some of the people who are least expected to be our central collaborators. I got people on my team in the audience, and they're good people. And I could say things about them, but then you won't hear any poems. Truth be told, this book that you hold, Doggerel, is all about joy, and it's about dogs, and it's about fatherhood. It isn't about prison. No, it's not, despite prison running through the pages, because this is the thing. Our lives have never been about prison, even when we were serving our time. Our lives have been about the tension between freedom and forgiveness. As a friend once reminded me, I know what it's like to be placed in a cell with a rectangular tray slot that is only unlocked so you can kneel and grab a tray of slop, or kneel to be cuffed and shackled before being taken from your cell and hold to your twice-a-week shower. But you know what else he knows, and what else I know, and what else I hope that you all recognize? That there is something that's being nurtured in some of the darkest places in this country that just might save us. Now for poems. This future. It's called a guzzle. Doesn't really matter, but it has a rhyme scheme. So because this is a teacher institute, and I promised Britt's boss that this was going to be educational, I have to get that part out right now. It's a repeating refrain that you'll hear at the second line of each couplet. It is his future. And then the word before that rhymes. So you'll hear nail, quail, motel, Orwell, sell, smell, bail. See, then this is part of it. You're supposed to think that it was cool. And now the stakes is high. Because now you're like, oh, that's cool, but is the poem any good? Things we carry, hiccups and regrets, lost receipts, the shrapnel of my mind, all death knell his future. Dear Father, how you forget what I remember? Your son's nightmares threaten to quell his future. And still, why not forgiveness or mercy, God asks? What makes him sacrifice his soul, motel his future? Everything they say about suffering, about his suffering, earned or not, it probably ain't only or well his future. My son, you don't know the things round my neck. Dear albatross, tell father a crack pipe bails his future. I'm afraid when I look to the right, my brother vanishes, as if he never exists. No, exists less. This cell, his future. Everyone here is me. All of us chasing love or hope or the gospel, or however this madman retells his future. His brouhaha, wild in a way. Can confesses, here is fragile, as in they go together. She and Shaf foretell this future. On joy for Debbie. For Debbie. Yeah. You see how I did that to give you a shout out so your friends would notice? You see, I got this audience participation thing on lock right now. You asked me how I'm doing. And I realized there are not enough words for joy in this language. I said, you asked me how I'm doing. And I realized there are not enough words for joy in this language. Not like in German, where a man can whisper a phrase for relief that roughly translates to, it felt like a stone falling from my heart. The gods must not know the things I've wanted in this world. In prison, a kite, a letter, it's called a kite. As if words alone can gift a man wings. And I want to tell you that my body is a kite swept into the wind. To say some days my heart is the wildest, hungriest thing I know. Whatever about choices. Follow me now, the erratic thing that knocks against my rib cage says, and I have. Everywhere. Off cliffs and cities whose names I cannot pronounce. Back in the prisons to walking Alec. A Jack Russell Terrier in a park with Debbie, to my son's basketball games, to weeping and to down on my knees. To something I've never actually called joy, but just might be. That remembering of all the things I believe needed letting go. Only to learn the raft on which I ride into my todays was built with them. I'm going to take this jacket off because it was really a prop. It might be the coolest prop ever, but it's 80 degrees outside. I'm going to thank y'all again for coming. I grew up in PG County. I went to Suitland High School, Walker Mill Middle School, and then went to, PG Community College, University of Maryland. But I say all that to say I understand how difficult it is to get here, and so I thank everybody who showed up. Also took my jacket off because I lost 60 pounds, and I wanted it to be clear that I lost 60 pounds. And so, losing weight. When I wanted to lose weight, when I started, it began with hunger, with needing to feel my body asking for more. Of it all, butter and salt and forgiveness. For Hennessy cursing through these veins, another tide ushering me back to all my prisons. It started with fear. Or not fear, but walking literally with what I'd feared. A dog with teeth that fled when threatened, even if them vampire fangs wouldn't break my skin if I were another treat. We walked to the driveway's end, then more steps into the space past the yard felt safe, until this Jack Russell Terrier that fit inside my palm as a pistol once did let me slip all those memories. And yes, I began wanting the world as she did. Full gulps of his scent until my nose twitched like a conduit for what might be possible. And somehow more and more and more of me disappeared. During those moments with my loves, the puppy leading and the two lights illuminate my world, and maybe it's folly for a man to admit he is in love with a son young enough to still believe his father's burdens will not touch him. And an older son who knows it doesn't matter, because the only burden to worrying is never seeing your father weep. And now, entire pieces of who I was have begun to fall from my body. Worries and so much more, as I become wildly as light as wind. As when my only burden was the cells I left behind. Race. Once, up 92 if a single step I raced Taylor. A small Jack Russell whose heart when resting beats 50 times per minute and mine beats 53, if at all. Low, low like the resting rate of the champ the year he quit being Cassius Clay and chose to become Muhammad Ali. And ain't we all out here trying to become somebody? So once, when Puppy wanted me to release her leash, instead of holding tight, I say, down, girl. And she lies all cool on the asphalt, waiting to launch herself at the next child in cleats. But only with my say-so. And only to steal a kiss. Shaheed understands the desire to be seen as more than a threat waiting to pounce. And so instead of saying, no, baby, I shout, race. And we run in these steps and my heart rattles and hers is audible. Even as her paws turn tay-tay, 2 steps at a time and for a glimmer into the DeLorean. And maybe I'm flying back too. If to fly is to be unafraid of the sunrise in your rib cage. All right, I got a habit that I be biking. I ride a bicycle. And I ride it at like 3 in the morning. I know, right? But I told somebody, I got to tell you this story. Actually, I'm not even supposed to tell you this story, but I'm going to tell you this story anyway, right? When I started riding at 3 in the morning one day, and this might make me cry, right? Because this is like, started riding at 3 o'clock in the morning, and my youngest son, you know, he was worried. He was like, yo, why you bike at 3? And I was like, because there's no cars out there. And my youngest son was like, that is the dumbest reason for biking at 3 o'clock ever. And so one morning, it's 3 o'clock, and the thing is, the garage was right under his bedroom. And so he hears me open the garage, and he calls me on my cell phone. And I hear the phone ringing, and it alarms me, because why would somebody be up at 3 in the morning? And I look, and it's him. And when I answer, he hangs up. So I call him back. He said, Dad, it's dark, and, maybe I should bike with you this morning. And I was like, kid, it's like, you do know you're afraid of the dark, right? And he was like, yeah, but, and I was like, look, and I made up this story that I heard about Kobe Bryant working out at basketball players, they work out routinely 7, 10, 12. And Kobe said, if everybody else is working out 7, 10, 12, I'm going to get up at 3, and I'm going to work out 3, 7, 10, 12. And I said, look, kid, I get up at 3 in the morning because when else can I get on a bike? I ain't want to tell him that I needed to learn how to be alone again, right? But I told him I work out because I gotta do it, and I don't have no other time. A month later, it was my birthday. And I woke up, and I saw his light on. So I go to his bedroom, and he's not there. And I'm thinking, where's this kid at 3 in the morning? And I go downstairs and I see the TV on and all the lights are on and he's sleeping. I say, oh, he just fell asleep. And I put the blanket on and I kiss him and now I'm leaving. And he jumps up and he says, Dad, you already went out? And I said, nah. And he said, okay, cool. I wanted to tell you happy birthday before you went out this morning. And of all of the people who told me that I should be concerned about biking at 3 a.m, he was the first one that expressed not just concern, but I will go with you. And then when I explained to him why I did it, he was the first one to say, I will support you in what seems like madness. And I wrote this poem one morning, 3:41 actually, in the middle of a bike ride. Roadkill. Well, watch though, it pays off though. And this is what I mean by like, you get to choose the story you tell. Because like, often you start telling a story and it lands one way. And it's not to say that the way it landed is true. It's like those Hardy Boy stories. When you get to choose, you get to choose. And I wrote the first version of the poem and the second and the third, and it matched the title. And then I said, yeah, you get to make a choice. And I am here every day for a reason. And how do I write that poem? And so this actually is that poem despite the title. Roadkill. It's 3:41 a.m. And already I have biked a mile from my first cell to the chow hall a half dozen times, if at all. And my body is tired enough, and I admit to no longer wanting any of this. The stars acknowledge no one at this time of betwixt and between. And there is nobody to call. And a dead black thing in the street is an animal, until I get close enough to see that it's only a bag flitting in the wind. We've all been mistaken for something less alive in this life, I know. As I stop my bike before a liquor store holding whiskey that no longer drowns me. And remember, standing beneath a flyer with a black girl dancing under Basquiat's crown, forgetting who loves you is the easiest way to vanish. All right, a few more, then we open it up for questions. This is called Guns, Dogs, and Heroin, and it's an amazing story behind it. And I'm not even going to tell you because it's going to take me too long. I shall just say that I ended up at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and this is what happened. Guns, dogs, and heroin. But not gin. Not because of judgment or how some seduction reduces us all to a mistress of common sense, but because the smell of gin ain't funky enough. Not the guttural need that follows any get down or birthday. You know, one of them walking in the rain funky days, though not for the sadness, but for the joy of more. And the calling above says this world notices something other than me. And then boom, I'm back on the Pettus Bridge. Barefoot in another downpour, on the other side a woman I just met waits to return me to near a memorial that stretches across so many acres of green. With its 800 giant cordon monuments falling from the sky, surnames if known of a black person lynched in these United States carved in the steel. All for this legacy of survival we carry with our breath. And the two ribbons tatted behind this woman's ear. The J's with a dragon leaping from the tongue on her arm and her waiting as I walk chaotic across a bridge on a day that would have been Rosa Parks' 111th birthday. Testify to all the ways we come to know each other. And as I turn to see the deadly, I stare down a fall that would foreshorten the life of a fallen God. And I remember Bloody Sunday. How back then, even faces snarling, they'd held fast to their Sunday mornings. And maybe this is what the older couple remembers. The two I turn and see walking just a pace behind what I've become. A man barefoot and weeping in the rain. And they step without talking, but there, as if to tell me as I walk that today a day of raindrops. August, whatever men lost at sea, desire when they feel drowning. Desire when they fear drowning. All right, a few more. This one has a question for the audience, especially for people that just came in late. I actually know who that is. She conducted my wedding. I'm not going to blame her for my divorce. That was such a bad joke. Oh, my God. I'm sorry. I should not have said that. I'm sorry, Reverend Bullock. All right, in a station of the metro, that's a complicated illusion. So in a station of the metro, that's one illusion. That's Ezra Pound. But that was the give me. This is the one you have to know. It's a song. It's the song title. Don't you remember? All right, now if you don't know it now, you have to know it by the end of the poem. In a station of the metro, don't you remember? Been running, now buoyant. This heart still a cauldron. Love's truant, my voice, hush. Tell me to God to pardon. My heart still a cauldron on a train headed for trouble. Tell me to God to pardon. This falling ain't never been subtle. On a train headed for trouble, a red ballad song on my mind. This falling ain't never been subtle. You remember our first time. A red ballad song on my mind. That night, Luther's voice and don't you remember? Running, now buoyant. Don't you remember refers to? Yes! Yeah. Luther Vandross. All right, one more love poem. We never say goodbye. And then I'm going to read a poem for my mom. Then I'm opening it up. Oh, then I'm going to read a poem I wrote in prison. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. When you get this book, you'll see that it's in the front. It has these images from poems I wrote in prison when I was a teenager. Solitary confinement. Notes from prison. The word prisoner haunts my soul. It denies my existence as a man. Likewise do my living conditions. My sanity is hidden somewhere within the code 251534. Man, I wrote this joint at Red Onion State Prison as an 18-year-old in solitary confinement in a super maximum security prison. I would talk about libraries and books. I would literally write down the names of the books I planned on buying when I saved enough money from the job I worked at 23 cents an hour or when my mom sent me some money. I would sign the poems as if I was somebody, like as if they were my book that I was writing. So I'll read 3 more poems, then we open it up for questions. We never say goodbye. You know, I wrote about prison my whole life, right? And I have never walked into any room. I've written about rape. I've written about people getting stabbed. I've written about people getting stomped out. I've written about the most intense depression you could imagine. And I have never walked into a room and had somebody tell me that you shouldn't read those poems. Not one single time. And I wrote a book that has love poems in it. And I won't tell you how many times people say, oh, I don't know if you should read that. This is not safe for work. It is amazing that suffering is more palatable sometimes in our country than joy. That grievances matter more than a smile. And it's all over the place. And but we never say goodbye. Not even today, because when y'all buy books and y'all, buy the hoodie, every time I see you, I'm going to know y'all friends. Also, I was told to tell you that there's a Freedom Library upstairs that you can see in person. This is something that you only get to see if you're in prison. Some people came late. That's why I'm repeating it again. Reverend Bullock. But no, also, though, nobody knew this. You get to browse the Freedom Library. And because we say freedom begins with a book, our gift to you is you get to take a book off the shelf and take it home with you and always remember this day. We do not have snacks, Nancy. Nancy hired me. Look, I got to tell you. When I came home from prison, I applied for a job. It was a job in D.C. I won't say the organization. They found out I had a criminal record. They said, oh, you can't work here. I'm sorry. They gave me the job on Friday. On Monday, they called me and said, we made a mistake. Now, I had told them that I'd been to prison, so that wasn't the mistake. The mistake was that they realized that I might embarrass them, that I might embarrass their board, I might embarrass their institution. And she literally said, and you know you'll be working with children. I applied to work at the D.C. Creative Writing Workshop with Nancy. And I was so, upset about the whole thing that I made sure I told her 7 times that I had just came home from prison. And she said something to the effect of, why do you keep telling me that? And she hired me. And it was a deeply meaningful experience for me. I worked there for several years. And so I appreciate you coming through, Nancy. We never say goodbye. The silence of the night breathes, and this ain't the lonely of leaves raining onto a dark road after midnight. And so one of us digresses us to a village in a country where we've never held hands, where men transform silkworm cocoons into silk threads and the quilts, the entire process alchemic, frayed remnants of a butterfly's past becoming the quiet where lovers disappear at night. Shahid knows that there is no disappearing in prison. What do any of us deserve? I close my eyes, touch a tooth mark beneath my heart. Penitentiary cells nearly became my tomb. I ducked contretemps and mischance. What might I deserve? After some seasons with this longing, feeling like heroin, you breathing here and now twice. My tears on your lips. All right. I like reading poems, actually, Hey, look, I got to say, I'm ashamed to say this. The first time I've ever wrote poems for my mom was in this book. I know, right? It's really embarrassing. But I wrote 3 in this book. And I'm going to read Arriving Late because, I'm going to read Arriving Late because this features my mom and my Aunt Tricia. Because what happens is we get to the airport, we miss our flight. I'm deeply, deeply upset about it. And then we learn that we're going to take 4 hours to get on the next flight. And then I realized I've been running so hard since I've been out of prison that I don't know if me and my mom spent 4 hours together. And it's this woman named Ellsworth that tells us, yo, I would have saved you that missed flight if you would have came to me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to write a poem for you and I'm going to put you in a poem. And I was like, hold up, I'm going to write a poem for you. I ain't wrote no poem for my mom. It's the day before Mother's Day. I'm tripping. So I say, I'm going to write a poem for my mom. But I do put this woman's name in it. So we had a bar and my mom was talking to her sister. And she's like, what that boy doing? She's like, I don't know what he doing. But I was writing this poem, actually. And so I wrote it in real time at the airport. And I shall actually end with this one. Arriving late. The only one on time was the dash hun, doing what Richard Pryor would have called low running, away from the airplane that felt like a cage to him. Shahid has known prison cells to feel like a cage and has remembered his name in returning to what the small dog would escape. The sniffing dash hun became a reminder that sometimes freedom means noticing what others miss. My mother stood beside me, and we were at an airport the day before Mother's Day. God knows the second Sundays of May I've spent in cells. And I should have known being with her on this one was all the joy I needed. Our missed flight had become a chance to lose ourselves in the despair of misconnections and layovers. Ellsworth behind his ticket counter, but from an island as lovely as my mother, said, I would have saved you too that missed flight. But then, what are the moments that followed when my mother saw me in public dancing with strangers? If to dance is to test out words. In an Algerian dialect, Dazara means roughly trying hard to befriend a stranger with words. And this is why I confessed to the bartender. My ring finger now is barren as a prison cell when I left it for good. My God, the prayers answered by leaving. May God forgive us for not knowing that we have always been enough for ourselves and definitely for the small dogs who appreciate the chance silence gives to notice what's been missed. Thank you. I was going to read this one poem that's really prescient, and we're going to ask the questions, but now I can't help but say this. Like, Reginald, a somewhat complicated man, prematurely set in his ways, decided at 16 to leave home. And then the poem ends. He left prison a couple years ago. I hear he's making out okay. And I wrote this in April 1999, when I still had 5 years left in prison. So, hope y'all got questions, because this is the most fun part, because I don't have to talk and be afraid that nobody's listening. Oh, we're going to use the microphone just because I think they're recording it for posterity.
When did you discover that you had an interest or a knack for writing?
I went to prison at 16, and the day I got sentenced, fully expecting to go home. This is the absurdity of hope, you know what I mean? I was like, I know I'm going home. My judge name was Richard Bach, and that's the same name as one of my favorite writers, this dude that wrote Illusions, and that was the first book I read, so I just knew that I had been visualizing myself free. And the problem was I didn't visualize myself free in 1996, so I didn't think of it well enough, you know? And so I get sentenced to 9 years. And something is wrong with my brain sometimes, because I get in the holding cell after I get the sentence, and I say, well, what are you going to be when you go home? I mean, I got 9 years in prison, and I'm asking myself this question, and I'm like, man, I don't know. What are you going to be? Because you were going to be an engineer, and now you got to do this time, and you might as well just be a writer. Because that's the only, you can't be an engineer from prison. You'll just be a writer. And I decided to be a writer in that moment. I know, right?
But you already had an interest in writing because you said you had a favorite book and the blog.
Yeah, no, I had an interest in reading.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And actually, I had an interest in reading things that I had no business reading. Because that book, I found that book in my mom's bedroom. I was like, I was looking for my Christmas gift. You know what I mean? And I found the book. You know, I mean, I love books. I won't pretend that I didn't love books, but I was completely ignorant of the world of literature and writing. My mom used to give me Walter Mosley books and pretend like they just came out, and they would always be paperback. I got older. I'm like, wait a minute. This book been out for 10 years. Like, what is going on here, right? So, no, I never in life thought of being a writer. I went to public school. I was told since I was a child that my handwriting was horrible, that I was inattentive, that I talked too much. What world would I imagine being a writer in PG County? And I don't even say that to even be dismissive of the school system in PG County, but we did not have a DC creative writing workshop. We did not have people teaching young folks that the ability to think creatively, to write creatively, to express yourself could matter for what you become later in life. No, I had no imagination at all for the desire to be a writer. I just had the devastation of being named a felon. And I needed to name myself something, and I needed to do it before I went back in that cell, into that cell block, to face the dudes that told me I was going to prison, when I told them that because Richard Bach was my judge, I was definitely going home. So no, I had never, you know, and I mean, to me, the astonishing thing is that, like, I made a commitment to being a writer when I couldn't even make a commitment to my own safety. I mean, to this day, the last fight I won was in 2nd grade. You know what I mean? I ain't just survived prison, right? I thrived in prison, and I thrived in prison as the least violent person I know, and still ended up in a hole multiple times, and still ended up at a super maximum security prison, and still ended up at another super maximum security prison, and still saw some of the worst stuff that happened to people. And I think the thing that tethered me to the world was that commitment to being a writer, because it gave me something that became a compass in my head for what might be possible. And then you fast forward, and this is how Freedom Reads begins in a real way. 2 years later, I'm in solitary confinement. And I ain't had no books to read. And they took all your books in the hole. And I heard some dude yell out, hey, yo, send me a book. And I was like, this dude is crazy. How you just going to ask for a book? You know what I mean? Won't you ask for your freedom then? And somebody else shouted out, what cell? And then you hit a book, sliding across concrete. I say, okay. Hey, yo, send me a book. Somebody sent me Dudley Randall's The Black Poets. I ain't never thought about being a poet in my life. The only thing I knew about poetry really was this poem my mom wrote on this life. Life is for living and caring and joy. It's this poem that my mom wrote on the inside of a photo album that she just sent me. First poem I ever read. I still remember that. And I get The Black Poets by Dudley Randall, and I'm like, wow. You could say all this in a poem, and I'm being introduced to Robert Hayden and Sonia Sanchez and Lucille Clifton. You know, I'm being introduced to Etheridge Knight. And it just, after his night had been locked up, he was writing poems. He wrote a poem about a 16-year-old kid that went to prison for freckle-faced Gerald. 16 years, hadn't done a good job on his voice. With his precise speech and innocent grin, he couldn't quite win the trust or the fists of the young black cats around him. Gerald ends up getting raped by the end of the poem. I'm in the joint thinking, man, I don't have precise speech. I ain't got an innocent grin. I cuss more than everybody I know. And damn it, I know that profanity was part of what saved me in prison. Yeah. I read about Gerald and think, man, yo, you got two choices: to survive and be a witness, or to die. And it just so happens that being a writer was the closest thing I could name as a witness. And I decided to be a poet. Because if this cat is in a book and he been in prison too, story of my life. I see one person do it, I could do it. So, that was such a long answer. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I go to Red Onion every year when the rapist who almost killed me comes up for geriatric parole. Why'd they send you to Red Onion?
I was 16.
They don't send 16-year-olds to Red Onion, do they?
Well, at the time I went, I was 17, but they do say 16-year-olds, you know.
It's the worst place on the planet.
Yeah, and what happened was, it was right when it had just opened. My cell partner had got an assault on the CO. It's crazy I got on these pants, because you know those long johns, the design on these pants look like the long john design?
Yeah,
he had ripped up some long johns and made a hat. He threw it to the CO because it was contraband. The CO caught it, then wrote him up for assault. I got a similar bogus assault charge. They needed to fill the spot up with people. They sent me there.
16?
I was 17.
At Red Onion?
At 17 at Red Onion. And I turned 18 up there. And I spent like...
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. You know, but I only spent like 6 months up there. And the thing is, I wrote a complaint. I said to child, I was like, yo, I wrote some of these poems on the complaints that I wrote. You know what I mean? When you look, you will see me like, you could see that I was like, you know what? I wrote the complaint, and then they said no to the complaint, and then I wrote a poem on the back of it because I was going to make use of it in some kind of way. I wrote a complaint when they sent me to Red Onion, and they said, obviously, we was justified because you there. That was their response. And so, yes. And I'm so sorry. You know, unfortunately, the system is frequently unfair. And I spent most of my time at prisons with people who were destined to die in prison. Yeah. And I've gotten 4 or 5 people out of prison, and everybody I got out of prison was serving life. You know, I went from Red Onion to Sussex One State Prison. I turned 19, 20, 21 at Sussex One State Prison, which was the same as Red Onion State Prison. And, you know, and one of the things that, most people don't know what Red Onion is, and they think, you know, they think it's like the whole idea of prison is all fun and games because, you know, if you survived, you either deserved it because you were there or you shouldn't complain because you made it. In reality, you asked me a question like, why did they send you there? I told you I ain't want to fight since 2nd grade. And I'm not going to, I could recount every single thing that happened in prison and how torturous it was. I could recount how, I survived because I was smarter and less naive than some of the people around me. I could tell you that I survived because I got beat up so much as a kid that I realized that if I didn't learn how to control my tongue in a slightly a more skillful way, that I was going to start, you know, nurturing enemies instead of nurturing whatever you nurture to survive a penitentiary. But they sent me there because I didn't matter. If you want to know the truth of it, I got locked up. I was 5'5", 125 pounds. I was arrested in Virginia, Fairfax County, Virginia, and you know. Yeah, Fairfax County, Virginia. So, I've just said my last curse word because I see my little homies just came in, and that dude literally looked like he'd been to prison though. No, that was just joking. That's my co-defendant, and but he was the best man at my wedding. I won't blame him either. He's my son's, but he's my son's godfather. He's my best friend. He's been like, you know, I got to tell you, one of the things about pathways to success after prison is if you have people that you could rely on and depend on. And Marcus Bullock has been a rock in my life. He's been a rock in the life of his children. And I'm happy to see you. Love you, man. I love you too. But men don't say they love you to each other in public, so I'm making sure that I respond just in case.
I Hi, I've been a fan of yours for many years since I read A Question of Freedom, which is about those red onion and early years. But actually, my favorite thing that you've written, and I'm a teacher and I've forced literally hundreds, maybe thousands of students to read, is an essay you wrote, I think it was called Kamala Harris, My Mother and Me. And what I think is so remarkable about it is it takes very seriously the harms of crime and the terrible damage crime, especially violent crime, can do, and the terrible, terrible damage of the criminal justice system. It holds those two things in attention in a way I truly don't know of any other piece of writing. I think it's remarkable. And what I want to ask is if you have any wisdom to share for all of us about how to hold in tension contradictions like that in this incredibly difficult time of the world and of the country, especially, I mean, we could list many things, but especially when crime is once again being weaponized to hurt the most vulnerable people in our society. How do we both recognize the harms of crime and the humanity of those in the system, both guilty and not guilty?
I will say thank you for your question, and thank you for sharing the piece, because you know I say the first thing is I wrote that piece, and I wrote the first piece about like going from prison to law school, and people read as if I went to law school because I was kind of be some kind of hero. I couldn't get a job to pay my bills. I mean, it was the most happenstance thing ever, you know. I won't even, it was just like, honestly, the reason why I know I'm not lying to you about just randomly deciding to be a writer is because I was literally in Harvard Law School's cafeteria, dejected because I had a Harvard fellowship and 2 books published and couldn't get even an interview for a teaching job. And I'm having to go home to a wife and to these 2 kids, and I can't pay no bills. You know, I literally am staring at doom. And this woman says, sees a friend of mine, and he says, "What are you doing here at law school?" And she says, "Well, I figured I wasn't finished school." And I was like, "Get a PhD in English or go to law school." And I was like, people be making decisions just like that? Man, I'm going to law school, you know? And I went home, and I tell my ex, I said, "Yo, I'm going to law school." She says, "Where you want to be a lawyer?" And, you know, imagine being so beaten up by the world that you can't even admit how every decision you make is a Hail Mary. You know, I wasn't going to tell this woman that I just decided to be a lawyer 17 minutes ago, you know? But I did go to law school. But the thing is, people loved that piece. I would run into people on the train. "Yo, I've read that piece you wrote, man. It's amazing." Don't nobody mention that piece. I had friends of mine who questioned me for writing it. I'm talking about I had progressive friends of mine who questioned me for writing it. None of them shared it. I mean, literally, Brian, you shared it. Kenny, you shared it. Yao, you shared it. But like most of my friends that was in the criminal justice reform space pretended like the essay didn't exist. And this is at a time when I was obsessed with Facebook and Twitter, so I was there every day. And I watched the crickets, and I thought, what did I do wrong? One person even said, "I dare you say X about this." And I was like, did you read 3 sentences before when a woman says that this thing made her realize that the lives of black women over 50 don't matter in this country? So I guess I'll say 2 things. I'll say that, like, as a writer, I've decided that it's important to run towards the most complicated of narratives and of stories. And I'll say that, like, you know, believing in mercy, believing in forgiveness, recognizing that one person, one incident does not characterize a whole group of people and even characterize themselves. I just think it's deeply important. And what I would say for everybody is that there's a breadth of literature. There's a breadth of interviews. There's a breadth of podcasts. There's an abundance of moments in our own lives where we have had mercy and all of that. And I think that we could do more to contemplate that. I mean, I would say that we could stop with the, like, this person deserved this. Like, that shit just ain't even cool. It's not cool just because you didn't like what somebody said to be like they should have got murked. Because I know everybody who said I should have been in prison. I know everybody who said I should have been at Red Onion. This was an anomaly. Somebody in a room that knows what Red Onion is. Most people who understand what Red Onion is, if you talking to me in 1996, you say I deserve to be in prison, because then as now you had political figures saying the same rhetoric. And the question is like, do we have a vision for a future that's different from today? But do we have a discipline and a sincerity to imagine that we really don't know everything? Like, where's the humility? And then finally, I would just say I think that we should really have conversations about literature and the books and the essays that force us to think in more complicated ways about these issues. La Rose, it's an amazing book that's upstairs in the Freedom Library by Louise Eldridge. I mean, it just made me weep. It's just such a devastatingly beautiful book about what it means to deal with a tragedy. And you know, like, it is so many people, man, that I just don't like these days, you know? But because I, you know, in the Harris piece, I mean, I'm writing about my mom, and I'm like, man, I talked about this shit in a penitentiary in Virginia, weeping in front of like 60 men. I know men in there got locked up for rape. I know men in there got locked up for murder. And they like, bruh, yo, you got it, slow down. I watched somebody come up to me and say, yo, I've read that piece about Kamala Harris you wrote, man. And like literally hug me. And so what I mean is that, like, we need to stop being afraid of the conversations, because, you know, I mean, our lives are filled with the need to overcome. And I would just point that out, you know. But I thank you for bringing the essay up. It came out the Sunday before the 2020 election. And to make this a little bit lighter, the one thing that I will say about myself is I had been following the Harris campaign for months. And they were stonewalling me, because they said a convict can't say nothing good about the presidential candidate. Now, they didn't say that to my face, but that was the vibe. And then she dropped out. And then I got so mad that I put something on Facebook. I had something to say, but since people don't want to listen to me, I'm just going to give it away for free. And I just gave the first paragraph out, right? So there was this black woman that was now her comms person who saw that piece, right, and calls me. It was like, yeah, I heard that you was working on a piece about the senator. And I was like, yeah. And she says, well, what do you think about reviving it? You know, candidate Biden is considering her. And I was like, I was trying to get an interview for months. Man, I ain't got time to be waiting like that. And homie said I could get you an interview by Friday. She was like, will you call your editors? I was like, sure. Now, the whole point of honesty is you are being honest unless they say, will you call your editors before Friday? So I was like, I will call my editors, but I am not going to call my editors until I have this interview, because I don't work for you. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, but like I have some kind of integrity. So I would love to do this interview. I am not going to try to write a piece to get you nominated as vice president, because that seems to be not something that I want to do. So I did the interview. The next week, the Times called me, hey, because then President Biden chose her to be the VP nominee, right? And said, hey, Harris is now the VP nominee. What you think about reviving that essay? You think you could get another interview? I said, well, you know what? and because she was now a vice presidential candidate, I no longer had the struggle of trying to fit her whole life and and I'm not a skilled political reporter. And so, you know, it was better for me, too, for her to be in a different position, because suddenly I could write the piece I needed to write. And I remember still struggling with it, and I asked my mom, I was like, yo, Mom, can we talk? Can I write about this? And it's my mom, actually, the two most important things that happened to me since I've been out. I was on the front page of the Washington Post, 2006, October 2nd, not that I remember the date. But somebody was doing a story about me, and they found out I had been to prison. And I was like, nah, yo, you can't write that. I don't want you to write that. And then the reporter, after going back and forth, they killed the story. And the second reporter was like, why you don't want to do it? And I said, because of my mom. And the woman said, yo, can I talk to your mom? And my mom was like, yo, if you want to do it, go ahead and do it. And if she would have said no, I wouldn't have did it. And then this piece happens, because I said, Mom, can we talk about it? And can I write about it? And mind you, we had only talked about it twice in 13 years. And so one of the reasons why we don't have these conversations that we need to have is because violence does have it creates a cavern in your life, and it is really hard to grapple with it, let alone to talk about it in public. But I think that those people who have been brave enough and have been capable of talking about it, that should be a part, and those people who have inflicted violence on others, that should be a part of the substance of what's going on as we think about what it means to move forward.
Dwayne, I would like to close it out with a question. We are about at time.
And we get to go upstairs. So for those
Yes.
folks who came late, you get to go upstairs. We get to kick it. It's food. It's free books. You get to buy hoodies, and you get to buy books. My book ain't free. My book is
Yes, definitely. Dwayne, you and I had a brief email exchange where you sent an essay or an article that was an essay that someone else had written about some of the work that she had been doing in prisons. And something that you said that really, I think, stood out and also really pointed to some deeper meaning was you talked about community building. And so I'd love to I guess, have you maybe share a little bit about how and where community building comes into play, and even thinking about your book, thinking about Doggerel and stepping outside of the sort of expected themes surrounding incarceration and involving these other themes of joy, themes of love. How does doing so and including the book in the collection along with other books in the Freedom Library collection, how do those things tie to building community?
So it's a couple things. So first, the whole idea of the Freedom Library. When you see it, you'll see that it's curved. You'll see that the books are accessible on each side. You'll see that what that means is you stand over the books and you browse it, and you pick up a book, and the person on the other side is like, oh, what's that? It creates a conversation. So the first thing is like, for me and for Freedom Reads, I think build a community means how can you get in conversation with people? And then also, I'm talking personal first, and then I'm gonna talk more broadly. And then also, like as a writer, I used to write, and I just wanted tenure. I just wanted a gig. And then I decided like I wanted to write poems that people cared about. And so I started reading poems to people on the street. And it started first because a friend of mine told me she had colorectal cancer. And I was at a loss for what to do. And I'd be making flash decisions. And so I say, you know what? I'm going to write you a poem every time you got to go to chemo. And now I'm like, oh, I have never written a happy poem in my life. And I got an audience. I got somebody who's going to chemo. And suddenly, that's when I realized the choice that I had. I realized that like the whole act of writing now wasn't me saying I don't have an audience and I don't respect the audience. I know who I'm writing to. And that was, for me, that was a part of building community because like it connected me to her in a different way. It connected me to her family in a different way. But really more importantly, it connected me to what I might do with a poem in a radically different way. And then I'll add on that, when I'm out in the world, I think that we do an amazing job of building community, and sometimes we just don't think about it. I think that what I've noticed in the last 3 years of my life is that, I have been ignoring the community that I have been able to build in really profound ways. I hadn't been, like I say, the easiest way to vanish is to forget who loves you. The easiest way to disappear. Because like what happened is I'm walking I coached basketball for 8 years. I mean, the decision to coach is such a community-driven decision. And I didn't think about it that way. And I didn't want anybody, the parents or anybody, to know who I was. I didn't want them to know that I was a writer because I didn't want them to think I was some kind of bad influence, right? And then for real, And then when I had the solo show, I had these parents come out to the show. And he's like, Coach Dwayne. And I was like, man, they know that I've been to prison, and they got me with their kids. I had a woman see me in a grocery store. It was like, Coach Dwayne. And I looked, and she's like, you probably don't remember me. And it wasn't the grocery store. It was at the basketball court for a tournament. Her kid was there. Her kid is like this huge kid, right? But he couldn't catch for nothing when I met him, right? I used to make him go to the wall and just throw the ball like this, right? So when she say Coach Dwayne, and she's like, you probably don't remember me. I said, let me see the ball. And I throw it to the kid. And the kid catches it. And then me and her start laughing, right? Because she knew. So when I think about building community, I think about what does it mean to live in a place where you live. I walk my neighborhood. You can ask my mama because she'd be jealous sometimes. I'd be walking like 10, 12 miles a day sometimes. You know you walk in your community and they'll know you when the cat that need a home, it's like, brother, you looking good today. And you know he saw you yesterday and the day before. So he's speaking from a discrete kind of knowledge, you know what I mean? And so for me, I've come to acknowledge that like building community is trying to put an anchor in a place. And if you're a person at Rome, is trying to put an anchor in as many places as possible. And I feel like, Planet Word has become a part of my community. This moment has become a part of my community. Brian Gilmore just stood up, man. These dudes I've known for years. And I don't get to kick it with them all of the time, but I know that they are a part of the community. I mean, I see so many people here that I know that it's really humbling, and folks that I've known since I got out of prison. And I think sometimes we are reluctant to own what it means to have a community and what it means to be responsible for it, because that's that second phase. And for me, as a writer, the Kamala Harris piece is me thinking about what it means to be responsible for a community. What stories do I have to tell to keep my community safe, to keep it vibrant, and to keep it aware? But look, thank everybody for their time.
I'm sorry, real quick. Did we have another one? Yes, let's get a microphone over to Planet Word's founder, Ann Friedman, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was so poetically stated, the whole hour. But I want to just ask you a burning question that I have, because where our lives intersect is picking books for people. My team, we had to decide which 100 books would be in our magic library and appeal to everybody, young and old, whoever came to Planet Word. And I'd love to know how you picked your books.
So it's the first point is I think you can't step in the same spot in the river twice. So, you go to a river, you go to Potomac, you step in it. You can't step in the same spot twice. And so that's the first thing I sort of conceded about the library, right? That we should just acknowledge that for all kinds of reasons, books go out of print, things like that. Then I said that we are creating a browsing library. So it's not going to be organized by genre or anything like that. And then it was the pandemic. And people were like profoundly lonely. And they weren't able to talk to each other. And they weren't able to even be in the same room. So I said, look, I'm going to start putting people in the room. I'm going to do focus groups. I'm going to get 3 people to get on a Zoom with each other and talk about the books they love. This taught me something. You got the life that you lived. So I'm 44. So my reading life is like, I started reading a lot. I started talking at 5. That's why I talk so much. And I started reading at like 5 or something. So 5 to 44. But then you got the amount of time you've known somebody. So if you've known somebody for the last 5 years, you might have heard me talk about like A Gentleman in Moscow or something like that, right? But if you know me, 10 years ago, it would have been a different book. And so often our relationships, the people only know us based on the books that we read while we've been friends with them. Man, it was the most lovely thing to have 3 people on a Zoom talking to each other about their whole reading lives. Because they was discovering, oh, you love that book too? Oh man, when I read that book, and it was just like being a fly on the wall to the most brilliant of conversations. And I had a whole Emily Bazelon and Wesley Morris and other writers and other law students that I had went to school with. I had, conversations with Jill Lepore. So that was one phase. Another phase was to send surveys out all across prison and just to get this pool of books that people had been reading and thinking about what people cared about. And then a third phase, because, I ain't read all of the books, and that had to be like I had to have some kind of humility in it and be like, how do you choose a book that you haven't read? Particularly when you're getting these recommendations. And so I had law students, man, I was working them. Yo, I realize it now in retrospect, they were reading the books, right? They wouldn't read the whole book, but they would read like the first 50 pages or so, and then they would skim it, and then they would read as many reviews as they could, and they would sort of write a summary, and really quickly they could sort of figure something out, you know what I mean? And then you had the whole history, the whole canon to look at and to contemplate. And so the collection ended up being books I loved, books I wanted to read because I already wanted to read them, books that people told me were great, and we used the quotes and things that people said about those books to really inform our decisions. And then as the time progressed, there would be new books that were released, or we would get reader feedback, because it was 500 books. And it's like, and so many of these decisions were 2 ways of looking at it. You could say they were arbitrary, or you could say they were a sonnet. I'm going to say they were a sonnet. And what I mean by that is a sonnet is a system of constraint. And so I had to develop a system of constraint that would allow me to begin to make choices that had some rationale. And so one of the constraints was, how many books will it be? Well, Sir Walter Raleigh wrote A History of the World from the London Tower with 500 books. So now I can make myself seem like Sir Walter Raleigh. I might get knighted, you know what I mean? But then I can also connect the experience of reading and of books as resources that people in prison might use to an experience that we could show had been deeply meaningful to somebody else in a similar situation. I know that the books are going to be curved, so that means people can access it on both sides. I know that literacy moves up and down in prison, so I got to have some books that they vary literacy levels, right? And then you got to have some Spanish books. You got to have some books it's mostly Spanish books. Some books is only in Spanish, but we have some books that have, like, you know, it's some books that's translated that might have like Chinese and different things like that. Those are mostly poetry because they exist in translation in both languages. And then we just prune. And my team, we argued, we discussed. We had a party. It was like I forgot the name of that joint. It was like the 26 More party. Because, you know, the birthplace of pizza is New Haven. Actually, if you're a New Haven resident, you have to say this anytime you speak publicly. The birthplace of pizza is New Haven. And so we had a party where we had New Haven pizza, and we talked about books. But yeah, that was it. And you know, when you go upstairs, you'll see it. And there's some hits or misses, but what I think is we've opened 500 libraries. And when we open up a library, what that means is we go to a prison, it might be 15 cell blocks at that particular prison. We go to every cell block with 500 books. Most people in their life have never opened 500 books at one time. It is such a lovely, joyous thing to do, right? And so you got these 15 boxes, they brand new books, they in plastic. You opening the boxes and you taking the books out. We've done this 500 times. And I have not yet heard somebody say, you know, I love doing the work, but I really don't want to stack I don't want to put the books on the shelf. Like people do it and they've done it time and time again, but it's like meeting old friends and new friends even after having done this 500 times. So that's the best part about it.
Round of applause for Reginald Dwayne Betts. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Be sure to check out our website, join our newsletter to stay up to date for more programs and events as they come along.